Meeting for Monday, December 6th. If you could all please rise for the reciting of tonight's Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. City Clerk, if you may do roll call.
Yes, good evening. Sorry. All right. Member Anderson?
Present.
Member Newnenkamp?
Present.
Member Russell?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Present.
Member Wink? Member Woodward?
Present.
Mayor Sierra?
Present.
6 members are present.
Thank you, City Clerk. And I did get an email from Member Wink that she will be online here a little bit after 6 o'clock, so shouldn't be too long. Next item up tonight is going to be City Council will honor the top 13 students whose artwork will be featured in the 2022 Student Art Calendar. So we are pleased to see many of you here tonight to help us honor these talented artists. Before we get started, I want to honor some of the guests that we see here in the audience tonight. So I know from the Inglewood School Board, I see President Dwayne Tucker, Katie Husbands, Gary Manfrey, Julie Hoag, and Stephen Leplar. See you all present. Thank you very much. And as well as the Superintendent, Dr. Wendy Rubin. Hi, Wendy. I know we're moving through this pretty quickly, but I also want to thank some of Inglewood's art teachers, Ms. Kate Delaney, art teacher at Charles Hay World School, Ryan Talbot, the art teacher at All Souls School, Emily Ancona, the art teacher at the Inglewood High School, Aaron Rademacher, art teacher at Colorado's finest high school of choice, Elhan Collins, art teacher at the Inglewood Middle School, Kurt Benson, who is the art teacher at Bishop Elementary and Cheryl Lynn Elementary, and Mcclellan Nunali, I may be pronouncing that incorrectly, but art teacher at Clayton Elementary. I also want to thank the school administrators, Ryan West, the principal at Inglewood High School, Shauna Martin, principal at Bishop Elementary School, Matt Palermo, the principal at Charles Hay World School, Cindy Schick, the principal at Colorado's finest high school of choice, Jenny Buster, the principal at Clayton Elementary School, Sherry Kangas, the principal at Cheryl Lynn Elementary, Tracy Alarcon, the principal at All Souls School, and Anissa Sinclair Hart, the principal at Inglewood Middle School. We would like to also offer a very special thanks to the art teachers, school administrators, and of course the parents who supported these talented artists each and every day. A little background on the annual calendar. Each year, the city of Inglewood produces a calendar that showcases Inglewood's talented student artists. To help choose the artwork that is included in the calendar, we hold an art contest that is open to all students who live or go to school in Inglewood. We are pleased to announce that we have received over 150 entries this year. The artwork was voted on by council members, members of Inglewood's boards and commissions, members of the Inglewood art community, and City of Inglewood staff as well. The 2021 calendar features 51 pieces from this year's student art contest, and I'm going to ask the Neighborhood Resources Coordinator, Madeline Hinkfuss, to introduce the top 13 artists. And I'll come up there as well to present some of the art.
Thank you. Before we recognize the artists, I would also like to acknowledge our generous sponsors for the 2022 Englewood calendar, the Museum of Outdoor Arts, who hosts the Top 51 Artists exhibition, and Frame to Art. Brian Hart and his team are given a very tight deadline to frame the pieces of art and mat every year for the artwork. And so now we are going to recognize the artists. I would like each artist to come forward. As I call your name, you will receive your framed art piece from Mayor Sierra. And the 2022 calendar artists are Gracie Assel, a third grader at All Souls Catholic School. Gracie's piece is called River in the Sun and is featured on the cover of the 2022 Student Art Calendar. Michaela Dozman, a fourth grader at Clayton Elementary. Michaela's piece is called Llama Sunset and is the featured artwork for the month of January. Trinity Weber, an 11th grader at Englewood High School. Trinity's piece, Cody, is the featured artwork for the month of February. Holly Frazier, a 9th grader at Colorado's finest high school of choice. Holly's piece is called Strat and is the featured artwork for March. Ava Diller, a 10th grader at Englewood High School. Ava's piece is called Golden Dreams and is the featured artwork for April. Teddy Shear, a 12th grader from Colorado's finest high school of choice. Teddy's piece is called Fire Flower and is the featured artwork for May. Liliana Sengoles, a 12th grader from Inglewood High School. Liliana's piece is titled Laura Harrier and is the artwork for June. Kaylee McCaskey, a 10th grader from Englewood High School. Kaylee's piece is Untitled and is the artwork for July. Trevor McIntyre, a 12th grader from Colorado's finest high school of choice. Trevor's piece is called Look, It's My Hand and is the featured artwork for August. Jade Gatorsman, a 10th grader from Englewood High School. Jade's piece is called Sand Planet and is the featured artwork for September. Esmeralda Gomez, a 12th grader at Englewood High School. Esmeralda's piece is called Colorful Beauty and is the featured artwork for October. Claire Good, a 7th grader at All Souls Catholic School. Claire's piece is called Stunning Desert and is the featured artwork for November. Kiera Kapler, a 5th grader at Charles Hay World School. Kiera's piece is called The Monarch and is the featured artwork for December. Congratulations to all of our artists.
Thank you very much to all the artists and all the parents that support those artists as well. We'll take a couple of minutes while we'll let staff shuffle through the room. Sure, Member Woodward.
Got a lot of noise. I'd just like to comment that I've been involved with the calendar art judging and presenting since 2005 with an interruption in between there. But it's always so amazing to see the work that our students do coming from Inglewood. And it's a program that is really of value. I know I've shown these calendars to other council members through the National League of Cities at the annual convention, and other cities have picked up and started doing the same thing. So it's quite the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Any other comments for council? So now moving on to agenda item 5A. Director of Public Works Maria DeAndre, Director of Finance Jackie Loh, and Finance Manager Kevin Engels will be present to discuss the payoff of the certificates of participation and the dissolution process for the Inglewood Environmental Foundation. Director DeAndre, thank you very much for being in attendance. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. I'm coming to you tonight as the president of the EAF Board, and so I will give just a brief overview of our discussion tonight and then turn it over to our legal staff who is going to walk you through the presentation. So this item was brought before you to at the request of City Council to talk about the dissolution of EAF and the payoff of our outstanding debt. So the debt was issued back in 2000 and has since been refinanced. And we're probably the final payment is due on June 1st of 2023. Over the last several months, we have been investigating what actions would need to be taken to pay off that remaining debt. And the amount was actually included in the supplemental appropriation in April of 2021. Since that time, through some more investigative work, we've come to realize that there are some additional steps to be taken prior to dissolution of EAF beyond just payment or payoff of those COPs. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sarah Rockwell from Kaplan, Kirsch & Rockwell. She and others in her firm have done some legwork to look at the kind of the elements that go into dissolving EAF. And she will walk through that in the presentation as soon as we can get that up here. Also on the line is from Kaplan, Kirsch & Rockwell is Bill Silberstein, who also did is with the firm and has done some more work on the specific agreements if there are specific questions about that.
Thank you, Director DeAndre. Before we get started, I know that we're having some issues getting the PowerPoint up, so go ahead, City Clerk.
Just also wanted to notate that Councilmember Wink is on the meeting. So.
Thank you, Member Wink. And do we need to wait for the PowerPoint, or should we continue to get started? I'm not sure. Member Wink, are you able to see the PowerPoint up online? Actually, Member Wink, I think you might be on mute.
You can't hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, I can see the PowerPoint.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we see the PowerPoint now. So if you would like to begin.
Okay. I will hand it over to Ms. Rockwell to begin.
Good evening, members of council, Mayor. I know that I've had the opportunity to meet a few of you on Zoom I think it was about a year ago, and there are a few new faces, so I'm glad to meet all of you in person instead of on Zoom. And I wanted to let you know that my partner, Bill Silberstein, is on the line, and the two of us have, at the direction of the city attorney and Maria, have looked into a lot of the aspects of the dissolution of EAF. We haven't been involved in the COP discussion, but we have looked at the implications of dissolving EAF, as well as the various agreements that EAF has entered into over the years that need to be considered as you consider the dissolution of EAF. And the PowerPoint that I've prepared tonight is intended to walk you through those various implications, and Bill is the one who has done the real deep dive into each one of the agreements. So if there are specific questions regarding any of the particular agreements, the implications of those agreements, that's why I wanted to have him here as well. Let me go to the topics that I'm going to discuss tonight. The first is just a brief discussion of EAF's formation and governance, particularly for those of you who are new and members of the public who may not be familiar with why EAF was formed and what it is. And then I'd like to discuss EAF's current activities, and then some of the agreements that EAF has entered into over the years, and then go through the implications of dissolving this entity. And there are several topics that I'll talk about regarding the existing agreements, the conveyance of EAF's assets, EAF's current liabilities, and the current redevelopment efforts that the city has been considering with regard to City Center. So just for a little bit of background, there's a lot of background here, and I'm not going to go through all the detail, but just high level. In 1995, the old Cinderella City Mall, where I used to go shopping as a little girl, ended its useful life, and most of the property was actually donated to the city. EAF was formed in 1997 because there was concern about some of the potential environmental liabilities that the city might be taking on with regard to the Cinderella City Mall, particularly related to asbestos and a petroleum plume. And my understanding is that EAF was provided to provide flexibility for structuring the development transactions that would occur subsequent to the conveyance of the Cinderella City property to the city, and not be necessarily subject to some of the charter restrictions on, for example, sale of property that would normally be the city would be subject to. In 1998, it's just relevant to know that there was an IRS private letter ruling that established EAF, basically determined that EAF was really a subdivision of the state and an integral part of the city for federal tax purposes. And that has some implications related to what EAF can do with regard to conveyance of property and value of property. EAF currently is governed by the second amended bylaws, which were prepared in 1998, and they've been amended by a third amendment in 2020 and a fourth amendment in 2021. It's managed by a 3-member board appointed by City Council, and the current board members of EAF are the Director of Public Works, the Finance Director, and the Director of Parks, Recreation, Golf, and Library. Current activities. And here, actually, maybe you could pull up the next just to get a picture of the map. The EAF ownership map is the property that is now that I'm looking at this, it's in green, and with the blue structures on it is the property that EAF owns. It's approximately 29.4 acres in the city center area. EAF is the lessor under a long-term ground lease that was originally entered into with Miller Weingarten, and the interests in that, as the lessee in that long-term ground lease, are now held by an entity called PWR 17-691 West Hampton Avenue LLC, which is essentially the entity that is the special servicer for the bonds because the property was foreclosed on. EAF owns the City Center building and leases it to the city, and EAF is also a party to numerous other agreements with RTD and Walmart in particular. EAF serves as the maintenance director for the common areas within City Center filing number 1. And then most recently, EAF and the city have entered into a preliminary development agreement with Scanlon Kemper Bard. The most recent version of that was in April 19th, 2021, which is the first amendment to that preliminary development agreement. and the parties are discussing the next step in that process to prepare a master development agreement with Scanlon-Kemper-Bard. Meanwhile, separately, I know that the council considered, I think probably about 9 months ago, a draft framework agreement that would provide for the eventual termination of the long-term ground lease and the transfer of the property that is subject to that ground lease in phases to the PWR entity. And that framework agreement has not yet been approved by council or executed. It was just, we discussed with you the concept of that framework agreement, but that is still pending. Here is a description of some of the EAF agreements. And again, I'm not going to go through these in great detail, but we've prepared a summary of all of them. There's a declaration of easements with covenants and restrictions that EAF and Walmart have entered into that really address how the city center property is governed and developed. There's a common area maintenance agreement between EAF and Walmart that addresses the maintenance of the city center property and who has what responsibilities. There are agreements with RTD, the most important of which is the permanent transit easement from EAF to RTD related to the transit center. There's the Miller Weingarten ground lease, which we've discussed. It expires in 2075. And then the preliminary development agreement and the framework agreement that I referenced previously. And again, happy to get into detail on any of these. So let's talk about the implications of dissolving EAF. And these are the 5 topics that I'd like to address with you. Existing agreements, potential environmental liabilities, conveyance of EAF assets, current EAF liabilities, and current redevelopment efforts. With regard to the existing agreements, we went through each agreement to understand what happens if EAF is dissolved. And they're different, but most of them have a provision that says that that they run with title to the property. So in other words, if the property is conveyed from EAF to the city, that the city just takes on the agreement because it runs with title. Some of the documents would have to actually be formally assigned from EAF to the city, which the agreements contemplate. But we think that in any event, all of the documents, there is an ability to have those documents either assigned, transferred, or run with title so that the city is then responsible for the obligations and is a party to those documents. There will though still need to be negotiations with third parties, for example, Walmart and RTD, because in some cases there are requirements that those, in particularly Walmart, that those parties are involved in at least are informed of the assignment, and with regard to some of the agreements have rights to not necessarily approve the assignment, but they will have other approval rights. There will also need to be an appointment of a new maintenance director with approval of Walmart and also the owners of the retail, residential, and EAF property. Potential environmental liabilities. So as I told you in the beginning, one of the reasons EAF was formed was to shield the city from potential environmental liabilities. And with any transaction where you are taking title to property, it's very important to understand and evaluate the status of the EAF property before taking title. There was a no further action determination done by the state in, I believe it was 2000. However, a lot could have happened between 2000 and now, and there are steps that would need to be taken to really evaluate what environmental liabilities you could be taking on as a city when you take title to the property. The process for doing that is similar to the process for conveyance of any property. You engage a consultant to perform an environmental site assessment. You review relevant lease and conveyance documents to understand potential claims against EAF or that are available to EAF, and you evaluate any cleanup that might be required for compliance or to support future development. And we strongly recommend that the next step here, among other items, should you decide to proceed forward, is to take those steps to perform the correct environmental site assessments and make sure that you know what you're acquiring if you're going to acquire this property. And there may, I mean, this is also important for purchaser defenses to CERCLA liability, and again, other steps depending on the site status that you might want to take before you take title to the property. Conveyance of EIF's assets. I mean, this will be essentially a real estate transaction. So with any real estate transaction, there will be the appropriate documents and essentially a closing, so that there will be a deed from EIF to the city, to the extent that that's required, potentially a bill of sale, assignment of contracts. And as we discussed, there's other city due diligence besides just environmental that you would want to do with regard to the property. And you would go through a title and survey review to make sure you understand what the title is that you're taking, that the survey matches the title, that you reviewed all the title exceptions, again, as with a standard real estate closing. Again, these are steps that are very doable, that you just have to do them and make sure that you've done them correctly. With regard to current EIF liabilities, this is one that your city attorney raised, which is that to the extent that EIF has any current liabilities, it will be important to understand what those are and make sure that you're protecting yourself against those liabilities. And for example, I understand from the city attorney that there's a premises liability lawsuit that is, I'm not sure I know the exact status of it, but it's an example of something that needs to be resolved or planned around should you take title to the property. And then finally, with regard to the redevelopment efforts, so far the preliminary development agreement with Scanlon Kemper Bard and the framework agreement have the city and EIF as parties to those two documents. It will be important, first of all, to just clarify exactly with those parties exactly who they're negotiating with, whether it be EIF or the city, and explaining the assignment, et cetera. But that, to me, that's not insurmountable. That's just the mechanics. But you should be aware that if the city takes title to the property and it's no longer held by EIF, there are city charter provisions that you're going to just need to evaluate and determine whether they apply or not. And those relate to transferring property for value, whether it needs to be fair market value or not fair market value, whether there are public bidding requirements that may be implicated with regard to particularly the property that is subject to the ground lease. And we've had a lot of discussions with the city attorney about those topics, and those are just items that you're going to need to consider, that the city charter applies to the city, obviously, and not necessarily to EIF. And then as I discussed, the negotiations on the third-party agreements, we'll just have to be sure that we're contemplating that EIF will be dissolving, so that we address that properly in the language of various agreements as we proceed forward. Because as part of the redevelopment of the city center property, many of these third-party agreements need to be renegotiated. So that is the end of the presentation. I hope that's helpful and kind of clarifies some of these questions. And again, if you have questions for either Bill or me, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, our goal tonight is just to confirm with City Council if we're on the right track in terms of moving forward. Our next steps are to address the environmental liability aspect and do some of that assessment that Ms. Rockwell mentioned. So we'll open it up now for questions, and we're all here to assist.
Thank you, Director DeAndre. So just to be clear, so tonight staff is looking for direction on whether or not we want to move forward with the dissolution of EIF. Anything else that you're asking for tonight in terms of next steps, or I guess from council perspective, if we were to move forward with the dissolution with EIF, are there any any information that you would need from staff in order to move forward with dissolution, if that's the decision that you want to go. So I'll open up to questions from members of council. Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Rockwell and Director DeAndre for the presentation. I had one question about the environmental issues. You said that there was a determination of no further action. What does that mean? Does that mean that anything before that date, we don't have, the liability has already been determined that there's nothing there, and then we're just looking at the time since then, or could something from the past come up again in terms of environmental liability?
Well, and I will preface this by saying that I'm not an environmental lawyer, and
Sure.
my partner Polly Jessen is, and she could answer this question like in great detail. But what I will say is that what you really need to be looking at is what that no further action letter said, and what it said could be done and couldn't be done. What cleanup plan was created based on that no further action letter, or that allowed that no further action letter to be implemented, and then what changes have been made to regulations since that time. For example, asbestos in soils there are new regulations that have been adopted since 2000 that, as I talked to my partner, she says you really need to consider those regulations and whether there are new cleanup standards or requirements that may need to be considered.
Right.
So it's really a looking forward, but also understanding what the NFA and the cleanup plan actually allowed and didn't allow.
Okay. And Director DeAndre, it sounds like with all of this, there's maybe a series of steps that staff will have to go through in terms of all the agreements and liabilities and everything. Will, in order to get this done by the kind of timeline in order to meet that window when we could close this out by June, will there be multiple times where you would anticipate coming back to council for direction on different aspects of this?
Potentially, yes. So we'll likely have a contract with Kaplan Kirsch Rockwell to do some additional legal analysis with us as we evaluate those agreements, as we negotiate those with the various parties. And then also, depending on the dollar amount, we will come forward with the actual environmental work. We would retain an environmental consultant to assist us with that. Barring that, our plan is to move forward with dissolution of the COPs on or before June 1st. Our next opportunity would then be December 1st of next year. It will likely not be that all of those will gel perfectly of resolving these agreements before that, but I think the COP payoff is one step in that process. So a lot of that will depend on the framework agreement, the timing for that, and that will probably drive more of the other items beyond the COP.
So we could do the COP payoff and then spend multiple months after that still wrapping up other EIF issues before we close it out if necessary?
Correct.
Okay. Very good. And I'm in favor of moving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Woodward.
If I understood that correctly, what you just said, it would be doing the paperwork and the payoff, that would be coming from the city, correct?
No, it's actually EIF who holds those certificates of payment, so it would be EIF paying it off. The action that would be taken upon payment, so we would have no further debt at that point related to the payoff, then the land could be transferred from EIF to the city. Is that the question?
Okay, and would that happen all in one transaction?
No, so I think before we transferred the property, these other elements that were just reviewed, we want all of those to be completed before we actually made that transfer and actually did the bill of sale, whatever that contract looked like.
Okay, and then how would EIF pay for that? I mean, EIF doesn't have the...
Yes, so we budget for that every year. And so what we were planning to do, we're planning this for June 1st of 2021. And we had, through the supplemental appropriation, the city manager had identified additional funds in that process to pay this off earlier. Then we became aware that there may be some concerns related to the framework agreement, and so we didn't push the go-ahead button at that time for June 1st. So now our next opportunity, or excuse me, for December 1st of this year. So we would have been coming up on that date, or just past. So now we're targeting June 1st of 2022. So we have the funds available. It is paid through the city's budget through EVE.
Okay. Yeah, the environmental, the plume, I'm going from memory, that's Shell Oil, right? From across the street on Hampton?
Yeah, I'm not
You
sure
know,
the
I don't know
ownership,
the
but
answer to that.
it's on the south side of Hampton.
Yes, okay. And do you know if there's been any evaluations of that in recent years?
Yes, I did contact the state oil and gas division just to see what the status was. They did provide me with some paperwork. It still is an open case, and I think that would be part of that environmental analysis. We'd provide that to the consultant to evaluate that and then gather any other information that the state may have. But it is open, and they're aware of it.
Okay. And my last question is, I'm not real clear on what, if some of these other things, as far as the sale goes and stuff, haven't happened by, or aren't expected to happen prior to June 1st, then wouldn't it make more sense to wait until December 1st?
Certainly, I think I think that will be part of the evaluation. Our intent originally, as I mentioned, sorry I screwed up the dates, was December 1st of this year, so just last week. And we have to give that notice approximately a month ahead of time. We made the decision just a couple months ago to say, let's slow this down, make sure we're not unintentionally doing something that might hinder us with the redevelopment agreement. And so I think that will be an ongoing discussion with community development staff, with Kaplan Kirsch Rockwell, to again, what is that right timing? So the benefit for the city is to not necessarily, we don't really gain anything. There's no penalty for paying at this off early. We do save a little bit on interest. So if there is some further benefit of delaying that till December 1st of next year, or even that very final payment date on June 1st of 2023, we will continue to evaluate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. So I have a couple of questions, and I mean, one of them is, Council looked at where the money was coming from, and sources identified it wasn't necessarily from the EVE budget, correct, that we were taking the $2 million? Or
Director Loh is here, as well as Kevin Engels, and I'll have one of them speak to the funding.
Yes, Councilmember Russell, you may recall the staff presented a budget supplemental number 4, including $2.8 million to pay down the CLF, $1.4 million per year. Since this did not happen this year, if we plan to pay down the CLP for next year, we're going to do another budget supplemental by using the funds in the unassigned fund balance.
so what happens if we don't pay it off, which I'm assuming we're not? What happens to that $2.8 million?
We'll transfer back to unassigned fund balance, then reappropriate for 2022.
And then we'll reverse the supplemental. Okay, my other question is, and I don't know which one of you should answer this, but what happens if we don't pay it off at all and we just wait till they come due in June of 2023?
Yeah, on June 1st, we pay the principal and interest. On December 1st, we're only paying the interest. Interest, yes.
Okay, but
But if we want to pay off we don't have to wait to pay off the debt on June 1st or December 1st. We can pick a different date.
okay, we can pay a different date. All right, thank you. I appreciate that. So, but if we're not transferring the property back to the city, is it that important?
To pay off
I
the
mean,
debt?
is it important for EAF to be debt-free to move forward with what we have?
Yes, and again, I think that's the larger context that we're talking about tonight is, and why we delayed it from December 1st of this year. It doesn't really help us any one way or the other if we're still in these negotiations, we're still trying to figure these various agreements out. So it is part and parcel together, and I think that's completing the payment is just one piece of the puzzle, and that sets it up for the remainder of these other items that will be worked out over the next several months.
So the truth is, we have to do all of these things probably even now, even if we didn't pay off the certificates of participation. Because even after we pay off the certificates of participation, we still have these common area maintenance agreements
Correct.
and all of that that are going to have to be renegotiated anyway.
Absolutely, yes. Mhm.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
Any other comments? Member Ward? Or actually, Member Noonkamp.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for the presentation. I found it incredibly informative. I have a question around the existing agreements component. I understand that there's some renegotiation that would be needed if we were to do this. Is it as simple as where EAF is currently a party to an agreement that then the city would become a party to the agreement and some of those things would transfer cleanly, which is idealistic, I understand, or is it more complicated than that? And are there areas or agreements that the city couldn't be party to based on the fact that it's a city? Can you offer any detail on that?
That's a great question, and I hate to say it, the devil is in the details, right? Each agreement is different, and some of them, and Bill, if you're there, you feel free to weigh in on this too. Some of them are very clear about the ability to just assign the agreement, in which case you do a simple assignment document and you're done, and you inform the other party. Some of them are not quite as clear, so there may be some back and forth with the other party to confirm the assignment. And so, but those are the existing agreements. The other ones that we've also been talking about are some of these agreements that are going to, as part of the redevelopment efforts, need to be renegotiated. Those don't necessarily all have to be renegotiated before EAF is dissolved, but that all needs to happen as well. So hopefully I'm answering your question, but again, every one of them is different, and some of them are trickier than others.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward.
You mentioned the IRS and possible IRS implications. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
The only reason I mentioned that is because it was a private. We were looking at a while back. We were looking at the question of the transfer by EAF of the property under the framework agreement and the way we had set it up, and so we had separate nonprofit counsel, and EAF also has separate counsel. Look at the question of what exactly is EAF and what isn't it. And so the only reason I raised this IRS private letter ruling is because the IRS determined that for purposes of federal tax purposes, that EAF was a subdivision of the state. For purposes of the state, EAF is still a nonprofit corporation. And it has to do with whether the property can be conveyed for no cost or not, and it was that was the minutia that we were getting into on the framework agreement. But I don't think it has any implications with regard to the dissolution of EAF. That will still be governed by EAF's articles and bylaws.
Thank you.
Member Woodward.
For clarity, I guess for myself anyway, EAF is wholly owned by the city, right?
No, EAF is a separate Colorado nonprofit corporation.
But
It's a separate entity.
separate entity,
Yeah.
I understand that, but
It's not wholly owned, no. I mean, it's a funny entity, but it's a Colorado nonprofit corporation governed by its articles and bylaws. And I mean, the interesting part is this whole question of who the directors are and the fact that the council appoints the directors. But it's supposed to operate as its own entity. And through the years, I think it's fair to say that the lines may be blurred sometimes, but it's supposed to function as a separate nonprofit entity.
Okay, thank you.
Member Russell.
Thank you. And this is probably a question and a statement. Once we dissolve EAF and the city becomes the owner of the property, then the problem becomes there are charter requirements if we're going to transfer that property to like SKB. Whereas if EAF transfers it and they own it, there's not those charter. So I think that answers my question. And so I think the one thing that we as a council need to consider is openness and transparency with the citizens, because ultimately they own this property. And do we want to keep protecting this property from our making a decision on it rather than the EAF board? Because I think ultimately that's where this is leading, is whether or not to dissolve EAF. And so that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Did you want to weigh in on whether or not you want to move forward with staff looking into dissolving EAF based on the time frame that they laid out tonight?
So are we, I think what they're looking into is paying off the certificates of participation and moving forward with the environmental evaluation and all of that. I mean, because we're not going to make any decisions, I don't think, until we have all that information. I'm okay with moving forward with that information because it has to be done either way.
Exactly, Member Russell. I feel the same way in terms of we're going to have to dissolve EAF or move forward at least within the next 18 months. So may as well start with the preparation now. Obviously, I don't want to rush anything, just get all that information that was requested. Any other members of council that want to weigh in? Member Newnenkamp.
I do have a question. When the COP is paid off, whether we do that on an expedited timeline or when it's scheduled, does that impact the existence of EAF, or can EAF continue on in perpetuity even if it's paid fully off?
I mean, EAF can continue on as long as it wants to continue on, regardless of whether the COPs are paid off or not.
Yes.
Unless I'm missing something.
No, I would agree with
Yeah.
that. I think the intent by staff was that because of this unusual circumstance of staff overseeing a nonprofit, that there was added clarity in dissolving EAF and getting rid of it and just bringing it back under as part of the city. And then that's when we've uncovered additional things that we need to do in order to get there.
Great. Yep. Just wanted to confirm that my understanding was correct. And in that case, then I think it's absolutely appropriate to move forward with this process and then continue the conversation around the future of EAF as we move down the line.
Thank you, Member Newnenkamp. Mayor Pro Tem Roard.
I'm ready to pay off the property and dissolve EAF. To the extent that this organization was formed to circumvent requirements which otherwise would have been guardrails in any process for our charter, how the city owns and disposes of land, I'm irritated at its existence. I don't support those kinds of organizations. Our charter has requirements. I feel like we need to honor those requirements, and developing clever ways to get around those requirements is upsetting to me as a citizen and as a member of this council. So the sooner we can get this done, the better in my book.
Member Woodward?
Yeah, my feeling is that I would like to move forward. However, I don't want to make that transfer until everything's put in place, and specifically the environmental, because I don't want to be buying some sort of liability for the city. So, but otherwise, I would say move forward.
Thank you, Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I did say earlier that I wanted to move forward, but after all the discussion, I wanted to add a little more detail to that. My view is more like member wards. I want to move forward, not just for the sake of preparing for the next step, but fast tracking as many of these changes as we can make to close out the existence of EAF as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Wink, did you have anything to add?
Nothing that hasn't been said. I agree with my colleagues for the most part. Yep.
Thank you, Member Wink. And thank you very much for everyone tonight for coming, Ms. Rockwell and Mr. Silverstein, for your time and participation in this matter. So thank you very much and happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5B under the study session area, Inglewood Utilities in South Platte Renew. Director Pieter Van Rij and Utilities Deputy Director of Engineering Steve Simon will present upcoming project development activities for piping the remaining open channel reaches of City Ditch between Chatfield Reservoir and the Allen Water Treatment Plant. Director Van Rij, thank you very much for coming tonight. An important topic that we hear quite a bit from citizens about. So, Director Van Rij, if you could get us started.
Okay, good evening, Council. It's just going to be me tonight. Deputy Director Simon had a family commitment that he needed to tend to. It's his daughter's birthday, and so I said I can handle this. So, is the PowerPoint coming up? Okay. So what we're here tonight to talk about is City Ditch, and so City Ditch is a Englewood asset that essentially starts at Chatfield and terminates at Harvard Gulch. It also passes right by the Allen Water Treatment Plant. So let me see if I can get. As you can see on the map, it is the map shows where the ditch starts just at the base of Chatfield and then ultimately ends up at Harvard Gulch. It's an untreated water conveyance system. So this is a raw water system. So this is how we get raw water to our plant, and then we treat it, and then we distribute it to our customers. It is a gravity system, so there's no pump stations associated with getting it from Chatfield to the Allen plant. It's also a combination of open channel and pipe. And you can see on the drawing, the segments in red are the piped sections. The segments in blue are the open channel sections. And essentially it's owned by the city of Englewood. However, the majority of the water that flows through it is actually Denver waters, and we have a number of contract users on the ditch itself. And so, did I miss something? It's on. Could we advance the slide, please? I have the worst luck with these things, by the way. My staff meetings, I'm notorious for hitting the button, having it go nowhere. So I apologize for that. So you can see, uh-oh.
What'd you do, Director Van Rij?
I don't know. That's why you shouldn't put one of these in my hand. It's terrible. So as far as I'll give you a timeline on this, and that's the next slide, is the ditch was constructed in the 1860s. So it's a really old element of essentially the city of Denver and Englewood and the surrounding areas. The Union Avenue pump station, which is our direct connection to the South Platte, does it work now? Hey, there we go. Thank you. Union Avenue pump station, which is our direct connection between raw water in the Platte and the Allen plant. So it basically pumps the water from the plant from the Platte to the plant from Union Ave to the Allen treatment plant. It was constructed and came online in 1952. Mcclellan pump station, which is another important pump station from a raw water perspective, came online in the 1960s. In the 1970s, we took over ownership between Chatfield and Harvard Gulch. We have in the 1980s, we started leasing water to Centennial Water and Sanitation District with a permanent agreement or 100-year lease agreement being established finally in 2003. And then what happened in the early 2000s, if you remember when T-Rex came through, City Ditch used to go all the way out to City Park. And when T-Rex came through, Denver Water didn't want to invest the money to do a large siphon to get under the new highway. And so essentially it got cut off. And so it now terminates at Harvard Gulch. And when it cut off at that point in time, the Englewood was provided the opportunity to assume the ownership of the actual ditch itself. So like I said, we own it. A lot of the water that runs through it is still Denver Water. However, we can run our own water through it as well. The last important thing related to the history is in 2012, there was an IGA between the two cities, City of Englewood and City of Littleton, memorializing the ditches for water conveyance. It's for water supply. That's the primary purpose of it. And there must have been some discussion at that point in time about historic designation, and it clearly states in that agreement, which is attached to the packet, that the city would oppose historic designation if it impacts our ability to supply water. So that gives you a background of how we've gotten to where we are today. So why are we looking at piping it? And if you recall, there's 3 segments that are between Chatfield and the Allen plant that we're looking at piping. And one of the biggest reasons is because of the issue that we hear most about as it relates to Englewood water, which is taste, odor, and hardness. And so we believe through our research and our understanding of the system as a whole, piping between Chatfield and the Allen plant gets us a direct connection to Chatfield year-round in a way that we can control the majority of the supply to the Allen plant from the location of Chatfield as opposed to the location of Union Ave Pump Station. I've got some drawings or some aerials that show why we think that's important. Additionally, there's sustainability aspects of piping that help us it's a lower cost. There are lower costs of chemical treatment for water that we pump from Union Ave. There's lower electrical costs because it's a gravity system versus a pumping system. Resiliency and redundancy is a big part of this. Right now today, the ditch is off, so our only water supply, raw water supply source is the Union Ave pump station. Like we've talked about in the past, those are old pumps, old systems. If we were to lose those catastrophically, it's hard to just bring the ditch back online to replace, to have a redundant water supply. So I'd like to get to the point where we have redundancy from 2 locations. So if there is an issue with either or, that we're not leaving it to chance as to whether we can immediately switch over. We have safety related to the ditch itself, since it's an open channel. Those are some of the things that we always want to be aware of. And then the reduced capital investment is related to, we talk about taste, odor, and hardness, and in the master plan, there's a significant amount of money dedicated to specifically hardness and water softening. And what we found in our analysis of the 2 water sources is that the water is not nearly as hard when we pull it from the base of Chatfield as when we pull it from Union Ave pump station. Here's some of what we believe is the reason for that. So what you see on the aerial there is the essentially Highlands Ranch area in 1955. You can see Chatfield's not even constructed yet. North of the Highlands Ranch area, that's all open prairie as well. There's not a lot of development in the area. We'll fast forward to 1985. In 1985, you can see north of the Highlands Ranch area is largely urbanizing at this point in time. And then you can see that Highlands Ranch is really starting to pick up in its development. And as part of that development, you can see the Highlands Ranch wastewater treatment plant, which is the red dot with the arrow pointing to Chatfield, to the Platte. It discharges below Chatfield and below our diversion point on City Ditch. And so now we'll fast forward to today. Now you can see that Highlands Ranch is largely developed out. It's 100,000 plus residents. You can see it goes beyond, even farther to the south than the drawing. You can see everything in the area is urbanized, and there's a large flow that's discharged from the Highlands Ranch wastewater plant to the South Platte below the dam and below our diversion point. Well, we think that contributes to, well, what we found is that contributes to the hardness. And so there are times of the year where the dominant flow that's in the Platte, in the South Platte, is actually the return flow from the wastewater treatment of Highlands Ranch. Very common practice in Colorado. It's how we utilize water resources. If you go downstream of South Platte Renewal, for example, and you're in the Brighton area, there's complex systems to pull that water off and treat it through multiple stages before it then goes into water treatment. And so what we believe is that if we can get upstream of that discharge point, which is a substantial change from 1952 when Union Ave came online and there was not a lot of urbanization and there wasn't Highlands Ranch and there wasn't a 6 MGD discharge at that point. If we can get upstream of that, we become closer to what it's less urbanized, because really the urbanized influence is from East Plum Creek, as opposed to you get the large amount of South Platte River that comes into Chatfield that is really mountain water at that point in time. And so there's a lot less urbanization impact to the vast majority of water that ends up in Chatfield. And so if we can get connected to that, then we believe that the source water challenges that come with just as water is impacted by urbanization and is discharged and reused, we end up lessening the amount of significant treatment that potentially is needed to be installed on the Allen plant. Additionally, from a capacity perspective, if we pipe it, we can run the pipe under pressure. So there are times of the year, especially in the summer, when we're running a significant amount of water through the ditch. And if we run too much water, then we hit the capacity and we overtop the ditch. What we'd like to do with piping it is be able to run as much water during the summer as possible to actually hit those demand needs that we have in July and August, so that we can rely less heavily on Union Ave, which if you've ever down by the South Platte and Union Ave pump station in the summer, the river is very, very low flow and is somewhat has more of an algae smell and things like that. Again, it's changing the dominant supply location from Union Ave to Chatfield to more closely mimic the way it was in 1952 when the pump station came on. And then ultimately year-round deliveries would be a goal. That right now we only run the ditch in the winter. Some additional factors, I think I touched on a lot of these, so they're just more of a summary of the additional factors, which are all important as well. Some of the challenges that we've faced is there is now I'm sure some of you have heard that there is now somewhat of a push to designate segment reaches of the ditch with historic designation, especially down in parts of Littleton. Those are the areas that we would need to pipe somehow in order to get that direct connection. As soon as we introduce an open channel, we can no longer run it under pressure, which means at that point in time we still have the capacity issue where we're pulling water from Union Ave. With that, we had originally put this in as one of the WIFIA projects, the Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act. That's our low interest loan application that we're doing. Once this started to trigger that response, we talked to the EPA, and it's important for us not to hinder the execution of that loan. So we actually just removed the project from WIFIA consideration, which then streamlines the other projects like lead service lines and some of the pump station and some of those critical projects that we have, and so that we could address this separately, since it was running into some impacts there. But you can see some of the other things that we're looking at in terms of permitting right away and some constructability issues. Some of the other things that we're doing on the ditch, the Mineral in Santa Fe, that segment to the far south, there's a development that's going in there. They're going to pipe the majority of their reach there, so that is actually going to be taken care of by the developer. It's a win-win for both of us. We are trying to, like I said, increase those ditch flows and maximize the yield analysis. That's part of this, part of what we're focusing on right now. And then there's this small reservoir in Littleton, it's called Linhart Reservoir, that has a direct connection to the ditch that we're working on how that interfaces with the ditch, because it does impact our operations in the summer. And we believe that we should go back to what the agreements are as opposed to we go back to what the agreements actually say as opposed to what's historically been done, because there's been less consultation of the agreement. So that's one that's you're gonna hear more about as we make some changes associated with that. Our next steps is we want to get rolling on this in terms of at least a phase one to understand the issues. You can see all the aspects that we're going to look at in phase one: conceptual design, permitting, right-of-way, outreach, interagency coordination, all those kinds of things. And then within that is an acknowledgement that there are people who want to protect the historic nature of the ditch. We've already met with Englewood Historical Society and laid out why this is important from a citywide perspective, and have agreed that if there are ways that we can protect the aspect of the ditch that has a historical value, but still accomplish the goal of that direct connection between Allen and Chatfield to improve taste, odor, and hardness, that we would consider those things. I think the same thing is planned to occur with the city of Littleton as well, or Littleton Historical Society. We currently have an agreement already in place with the city of Littleton, and the agreement from 2012 is that the intention is to pipe the ditch and that we would oppose historic designation. So that is a really quick overview of where we're at as it relates to City Ditch. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing, but that's kind of what we've been determining over the last year, and really we think it's a critical project to address the taste, odor, and hardness.
Thank you, Director Van Rye. Any questions from council? Member Woodward.
Thank you. Question would be the pipe. How big is the pipe?
It depends. We would look at it from a hydraulic design perspective, so some of that depends on the slope associated with it. Right now, the pipe is generally running around 48 inches in diameter, so it's a good size water transmission or water supply line.
Okay, and you said it's gravity all the way from Chatfield to Allen.
Yeah, it would follow the original gravity ditch that we look at. Now, there are sections of it where it's raised, where we have raised sections of channel. We would likely look at replacing those with siphons. So those are still gravity in the sense that they push water down and then back up, but it's a way that we would look at it. But it's a no pump station system.
Okay. So if there was a pump along the way and it pumping, would it pump more volume than the gravity? Would it have that capability?
It's something that we could actually look at on the upper end of the system is if we wanted to further increase the raw water in the pipe, we could evaluate putting a pump station at the upper end of it to take more water in at the intake at the base of Chatfield, and then essentially with a pump you're just cramming more water through the pipe at a higher flow rate.
Right.
So that's something we could evaluate, actually.
Okay. And then my question from there would be, number one, I want a pipe. Personally, I would like to see it piped the whole way. With regard to Littleton Historic Society, if the pipe at that location was deep enough, could they have a ditch on top of that?
So those would all be things that we would be looking at. And so I think the thing that, and what we talked to the Englewood Historical Society about was the idea that the ditch is going to flow water from April to November. I think people need to adjust, would probably have to adjust to the way the High Line has evolved over the last 10 years. So the High Line used to run water all the time. Now if you run down the High Line, it's always empty because they don't run water through it anymore. And so I think if the goal is to protect more of the corridor, similar to the way the High Line ditch is an empty ditch that's a historical ditch, that's something that we could work with. What it becomes then is what's the cost of doing that? And so if it's a matter of it's an incremental cost and we can make it work because we can put it along the side of it and we don't have to, we can protect the ditch. That's one thing. If it's something that doubles the cost of the entire construction, that would be something we'd bring to council to consider. And so there are many opportunities that we want to look at to help at least achieve what we think is feasible to achieve.
Yeah, no, I'm not asking for the city of Inglewood to pay the increased price of doing that. I would think Littleton would be paying that for us doing that. I mean, we have the right, it's in the document.
Yeah, I think, and at the time that we know those costs and we know those incremental costs, that's when we would come back to council and have more of a larger, higher level conversation of historic preservation versus water supply.
Yeah.
Not that they're exclusive of each other. It's just that they're, that they can work together in a way that still accounts for the cost.
Okay. And my last question is, in your background map here that shows the 3 segments, segment number 3, the top one, that open area there is the area that Englewood Historical Society is talking about?
I think it's segment 2 and segment 3.
2 and 3.
Yeah, segment 1, like I said, is largely through the development that is already in progress. It's down by Mineral and Santa Fe. And we've been working with them over the last couple years on rerouting and piping the ditch to achieve both of our goals.
Yeah, okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward.
What's our risk of a hostile historic designation here? Is there actual regulatory exposure, or is it just something that we want to do to be nice to our neighbors to not override their desire to preserve it?
Well, I think if we had kept it within the WIFIA funding package, that triggers that automatically triggers a federal process. And once we started to see how that was going to potentially impact the larger WIFIA process, we decided it wasn't in the original letter of intent. And as we've been going, so we got approved through the letter of intent about a year and a little over a year ago. And since then, we have been working through the application where we've been able to adjust and refine what projects we've included. And at that point in time, we said, well, we've learned more about piping City Ditch, and we said, well, let's put that in the WIFIA funding so we can get some low interest loans on it. Not realizing that was going to create this larger trigger with WIFIA funding as a whole. And so what we've done is we've just gone back to what the original LOI was, which was to not include this project. I think once that occurs, then there's no, in our consult with the EPA, then there's no connection between the WIFIA related work with the project, at which point it becomes a much more local discussion between historical societies, and I think we keep it more local as opposed to having a federal process involved.
So if I hear you correctly, the goal is to keep everyone happy, but there's really nothing that would prohibit us from acting unilaterally in this.
I think that From our understanding, based on the agreement between the two cities and our understanding relative to our rights associated with the ditch, we have a lot of leverage as it relates to putting water supply ahead of historical designation. At the same time, I think we can likely do that in a way that doesn't necessarily create a hostile environment. We're hopeful.
Okay, that's something I would support, but ultimately, clean, fresh water is a big priority, or as you say, aesthetically pleasing water,
right.
If that's the more appropriate term, would be a higher priority for me.
Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director Van Rye. Regarding the hardness of the water, you've done testing at where the water comes out of Chatfield for hardness?
Yeah, we've done testing at Chatfield, and we've done testing at Union Ave. So we've done we've done some data gathering to understand what the difference is between those two. And when you look at the results from the base of Chatfield, they actually are really close to what would be an acceptable level of normal hardness that may not require further softening in the plant.
So could we get that? I'm curious about because I measure my hardness in my house, and I'm just curious what kind of thing, because I get 350, 400, sometimes 500.
That's about right. I was going to say it's about 400 at Union.
So you're getting less than that coming out of Chatfield?
It's under 150.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that, and with that, very supportive of this.
Yeah. So and again, if you think about when Union was first installed in 1952, the way the river was in 1952 to compare to where it is today, it makes sense that the hardness would go up because of urbanization and return flows from a wastewater plant.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Member Neunenkamp.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for the presentation. I had the opportunity to come see what Director Van Rye and his team were doing at the Allen plant last week. And to my colleagues, if you haven't been recently, I highly recommend you go and see the improvements that they're doing, this project being one of them they're proposing. One question that I have is, in the segments that are already piped, so much of the ditch is already piped, were there historic preservation concerns when that construction was done, or is this a new topic?
So I don't know the degree to which during different piping projects that came up. What I can say is it came up in 2012. So there was the agreement that's attached to this item was contemplating between the two cities that there was a regional trail that was going in, and as part of that regional trail, there was a desire to create historic designation of segments of the ditch at that time. And so what the agreement tells me is this goes back at least to 2012. It's likely probably gone back further than that. I was alerted to it the first time probably about 2.5 years ago when this came up again in the city of Littleton. A colleague down there just sent me the agreement and said, hey, this is coming up again. Just wanted you to know that we're all still on the same page as it relates to this, which actually was my first introduction to the agreement. And so I think it comes up, there's a recurrence to when it comes up, and it goes back at least as far as 2012.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I will just echo that I'm very supportive of this project and finding a way to get it done. Just today, I spoke with a small business who's having to replace some equipment due to the hard water issues. And so not only is this about our residents having aesthetically pleasing water, but our small businesses being able to flourish in our community.
And again with Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just have one more question I forgot to ask. Are there limitations in our water rights on how much water we can take off of Chatfield?
That's actually what initially triggered this whole idea to begin with. Was we had a workshop 1.5 years ago, actually more than 1.5 years ago, where we were looking at ways to create resiliency in our raw water supply system. And this idea came up, and so we went back to our water rights attorney and water rights engineer and said, Well, if we wanted to, could we run all of our direct flow rights, which are Englewood water rights, and we had capacity in the ditch, could we run those through the ditch? And their analysis says that we can, because there's no intervening damage between the Union Ave and Chatfield, and that those decrees would allow us to do that. That's what their analysis shows.
So currently, when we run we run our water supply into Chatfield, or off of Chatfield into the South Platte to get to Union Avenue? And
Yeah,
this would be just a different way of getting the water to Inglewood?
Exactly. So when the ditch isn't on, the water is all coming via the South Platte to Union Ave.
Got it.
When the ditch is on, we have the ability to run either spot.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any other comments from council? Yeah, I too am very supportive of this project. I know members of council, I know Mayor Pro Tem Ward would always speak about it, even before his time on council, about just the water quality. So I know that this is something that is very important to many members up here. So I appreciate Director Van Rye. Any other comments before moving on to the next agenda item?
No, I think I would just say that we'll plan to continue forward as is. And like I said, we'll work with the societies to the degree that it makes sense. And if there are alternatives that could potentially have some kind of a cost impact, we'll come back to the council for evaluation at that time.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Director Van Rye.
Thank you.
And I know that we have another agenda item. I just wanted to ask council if they wanted a break now, or should we wait after the next agenda item, just because after? Anybody have a preference? Think we're good? We'll move on to the next agenda item. Next up is Assistant City Manager Tim Dodd will be present to discuss an update on the potential changes to the strategic plan. Short title, possibly long conversation. Hello, Assistant City Manager Tim Dodd.
Good evening, Mayor. I was also going to say short title, very long packet item, so there was a lot in there for you to look at, I'm sure. Let's see. Great. All right, great. Thank you. So I'm here tonight to talk about the city's strategic plan. So there's several things that I want to go through this evening, and as should have been in your packet, tonight is informative, but also looking for direction as well. We do have a placeholder item on your agenda for next Monday, so I'll talk about that towards the end. But I do want to cover a little bit about the history of the plan, and then some changes that we're proposing, get your feedback on those, and then have a few discussion questions. So it has a long history, even though it's only been about a year and a half. The city did, I believe, have a strategic plan in place before this that I think launched in 2018. In 2020, though, in January, at the retreat, when several of you were members, but obviously some were not, there was a retreat that was facilitated, and I believe it was a visioning session where you basically drew what you believed Inglewood should look like. And then from there was a public input process, and we're proposing doing a similar one coming up this winter. And then after that, there was a series of revisions. And then since it was adopted in June, I believe, or July of 2020, we have provided 5 different quarterly updates to you. In each of those updates, there's been a few revisions that you've made. We typically present them at council meetings as part of the consent agenda, but we've had discussions on them as well. And then 2 significant things that also happened during this period are we developed 2 of the sections into what I call plug-in plans, meaning that they stand alone as plans. One is the governance section that we call our blueprint for organizational success. That really is our internal strategic plan. And then one that is our sustainability plan, which you adopted on April 5th. So those 2 sections did get quite a bit of a rework in this past year as well. So the existing plan is organized this way. There's basically 3 layers to it. The first is an outcome area, and basically you see below the example. So sustainability is one of our outcome areas. The way I think about these is basically they're the 7 bottom lines of the city. They're meant to be brought on purpose. They started as narratives. They tie back to the visioning session that you did. And again, they're really meant to just kind of categorize pretty much every single thing we do in a city at a very high level. It's then broken down into goals where more specificity is provided. So basically in the outcome area of sustainability, I think there's 10 goals. And this is an older one. It was kind of recategorized, but it's still in there. I focus on water, as we just heard. And then there's many projects underneath that. Right now, a lot of the projects are not, I guess, by textbook definition, so to speak, project in the sense that they don't have definitive deliverables or definitive beginning and end dates. And so that's one of the things that we really want to propose tonight is that in addition, and we'll get to this in a few minutes, adding performance metrics to basically measure how well we're doing things that are ongoing, we also want the projects to be a little bit crisper and really focused in ways that we can track them more internally and then report on them to you. So this basically just kind of shows you what each year of the plan looks like. So when the plan was adopted in 2020, it was intended to run through 2022, so through this next year. So as you see here, the number of projects that are in each year of the plan does taper off considerably. In the first year, we started with 175 projects, and then it went to approximately 106 in the proposed, not proposed, but in the existing plan for 2022. And I did in 2020 and 2021, there's a few bullets, and these were taken basically from the reports that we do for you quarterly. There will be one in January for the last quarter of 2021, and these basically show the progress that we've made on different projects. So in terms of how we thought about revising the plan, the first is that we reviewed the existing strategic plan projects. And again, we looked at the ones that some of them have already been completed early. We looked at ones that really weren't kind of defined as projects and kind of looked at some of the work plans in the departments as well. We then determined gaps in existing strategic plan. I think one of the most sizable gaps that we found is that really the work of our Parks, Recreation, Library, and Golf department, wasn't really represented in the original strategic plan. The Parks part was to an extent under sustainability, but we really lacked an outcome area that was really focused on what we're now proposing to community well-being, which really speaks more to things like lifelong learning and health and some of the facilities related to recreation. We also reviewed a proposed department goals for 2022. So one of the things that we really want to get to as an organization is cascading the strategic plan, which essentially means, we don't want kind of a strategic plan here and department goals here and individual director goals here. We really want them to align. And so we really wanted to look at goals that directors were proposing and make sure that we could include them in the plan. And then finally, integrating performance metrics. So for the past year, the city has been working on developing a series of performance metrics that really are mostly at what we call the output level, meaning they're designed to basically measure efficiency and effectiveness of programs. We're really kind of just dabbling with it. But we really, when we talked about it a year ago at the director level, the goal was basically after the first year of kind of practicing it internally, that we would add them to the strategic plan and that we would also then develop a dashboard where we would share our progress to the community on those metrics. And at the very end of the presentation, I'll share kind of a quick clip, and I think it was in your packet as well, of what the dashboard will look like once it's finished. So I'm just going to go through the 6 modifications that we're proposing. So the first one is adding the community well-being section. I'm not going to go into this in great detail now because I got ahead of myself and mentioned it a few minutes ago, but this was really a gap that we saw. And so we didn't really see goals in the plan really focused on, again, lifelong learning, things like in the library, physical health, recreation opportunities as well. We also decided to add a homelessness goal in this section. Right now, there was a project related to homelessness and safety, but we really thought it focused, and it is important to note that there are definitely many things in the plan that kind of transcend a few different areas, but we thought homelessness and affordability were better tied to this area, this new one that we're proposing. We also decided to condense infrastructure and transportation. We didn't want to propose an 8th area just because we wanted to make sure that we still kept the plan pretty focused and we weren't expanding it too much. We did think these areas were tied pretty closely together. And also the number of projects in these 2 areas shrunk considerably from the first year even to this current year in 2021, but definitely to 2022. So we thought it made sense for those 2 reasons. Subject matters were connected, but also number 2, the number of projects was minimal in those 2 areas. We also started to add something called outcome metrics, and these metrics are really more qualitative than the other ones, which are mostly quantitative. And these are really basically designed to measure how basically are people better off because of the things that we did. And so this is an area where I think we'll certainly get better over time. It's definitely an area that takes time to develop these. But what we're proposing is that we include data points that come from our resident satisfaction survey that we do every other year. The city obviously makes an investment in that, and we want to make sure that there's a detailed presentation that's given to you by our pollster every time that we do this. I think there was one last September, but we really want to make sure that we're using this data and driving towards it. Again, these will definitely be refined over time, but that is something we're proposing. We also, as I mentioned previously, so I won't go into too much detail here, are proposing that we add output metrics, and these metrics are really more, we're calling them in the plan right now, how do we know we're on track to succeed? Because that's really what they are. They're metrics that are designed for us to basically know how well we're doing. And again, I think there are definitely metrics in there that need refinement over time. Definitely welcome your suggestions on them. But just to point out that this definitely is an iterative process, where we've been working with staff and coaching staff on how to do this. It's something that I did a lot of before I came to the city, something I'm particularly passionate about, but something that I know we'll get better at and continue to work on over time. The fifth modification is condensing projects. Mentioned this one as well, really trying to kind of laser beam focus on key projects that are important, that tie back to the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and that are by definition projects. And then finally, we want to add project spotlights, and this is really just a simple way of highlighting some key projects in each of the areas and it's really just more of a just something that we wanted to make sure was kind of graphically added to the document to kind of pop out some key things that we're working on. I'm not going to go through all these goals in detail, and they are listed in your packet. And so the way they're written here is they're not written as goals, right? They're written as categories. In your packet, there's a table in the council communication that has a description of what each of these are and kind of what we mean by these based on prior work that we've done. So community well-being, as we've talked about, is really focused on, again, lifelong learning, physical and mental health, homelessness, affordability, and then parks and recreation facilities. Governance is a little bit different. As I mentioned, there is what we call, again, a plug-in plan, the Blueprint for Organizational Success. It was presented to council at your retreat this past year in January of 2021. It does have, I believe, 11 goal areas, and these were really developed through focus groups that City Manager Lewis and I did about a little over a year and a half ago, a little less than a year and a half ago, I should say, with staff. So we took those focus groups and their feedback from the leadership team. We do a satisfaction survey of employees every year. We just did one a couple weeks ago, but we used that input that we got a little bit last year. And that's how we came up with these goal areas under governance. Infrastructure and transportation. These really were things that were already in the plan. We just kind of consolidated them. The focus on flood mitigation, sewer, transportation, the funding aspects related to infrastructure, and then asset management, of course, transportation safety, and then multimodal transportation. So that's really where we have things like the scooter pilot and things related to biking and walkability and things like that. Local economy. These again. The local economy section currently has, I don't know the exact number, but it has many goals. We really think that we're keeping the themes of all of them. We've just kind of consolidated them into a few key areas, which you see here. Neighborhoods, kind of the same thing. So focused on neighborhood connections, community engagement, neighborhood aesthetics, and then we also wanted to, there's a lot of things that our communications department that didn't necessarily fit into more of the engagement aspect. But focus more on kind of the one-way communication of sharing things with the city. So we wanted to include those as well. Safety, this section we actually added a lot of things to in March after a lot of the police reform efforts. I'm proud to announce that many of those projects have been completed. There still are some that are in there, but this is focused on high-quality policing, policing policies, and also building and police safety is also included in this. And then sustainability, and it's important to point out, with sustainability that we did spend quite a bit of time. I know not all of you were members of council then, but we did spend quite a bit of time between last November and then this April with council developing the sustainability section in these 10 goal areas that were developed in that point and approved in April. Just want to talk a little bit then now about some of the next steps and the community engagement part. So similar to what was done about a year and a half ago, the plan is, again, to come back before you next week. If there's any changes that come out of tonight's discussion, we'll add them to the document. We're also working with a graphic designer, so the one you'll see for next week will be a little bit more cleaned up. And then we're asking for support next week to basically not to finalize it at all. You'll have many chances to weigh in on it, but to basically put the goals and the outcome areas out to the community. We would use the Englewood Engage platform, which is the same platform that we use to get feedback on the ARPA plan a few months ago. And so we would get that feedback. The plan would be for us to launch it sometime next week if we get your go ahead and your approval next Monday, and then to close it roughly around January 10th. We think that the prioritization process, so the idea is that we would get the public to weigh in on what they think the priorities should be, and then we would collate and organize and analyze that data and provide it to you as part of your retreat in January, at the end of January. And then we would ask you to look at that data and to think about what you think the priorities should be, and then to prioritize the different outcome areas and the goals in the plan. This prioritization process is really important. Obviously, everything in the strategic plan is important, but these priorities will help us in a few ways. One of the main ways is they'll help us with the budget process. As I think you probably are all aware, this year, for the first time, we created an internal budget review committee. And so basically, departments could submit enhancement requests if they wanted to, add to their programming or add to initiatives in their department. And so we think by having priorities, we can request that when they fill out that enhancement form and they make a case for an enhancement, they can tie it back to the priorities that you set as part of the plan. It also will help staff know where to focus within the plan in terms of the priorities that you set. And it will also help us in terms of the quarterly reporting. Certainly we'll report on everything in the plan, but we'll basically kind of pull out the things that you set as priorities and kind of highlight them in your packet and our presentations to you. This is just a quick example, and again, this is in a very basic form, but this is the dashboard that I've been working with our IT department on building. It'll be a lot cleaner than this once it goes live. The hope is that this will go live in March when we're asking the strategic plan to be finalized. And again, this will be something that we want to share with the public in many different ways and explain what it is, and also refine some of the metrics before they go live, so to speak. But we think this is another important step in terms of transparency and in terms of sharing our progress on this plan with the entire community. This shows the timeline. Again, I do want to highlight that tonight is not, I know there's a lot of information in this packet for you this evening. This is not, the last time that we plan to come before you. Again, the goals of tonight, we'll get to a few questions in a minute, but really are for you to kind of weigh in on the high level aspects of the plan. Do you like the changes that we're proposing in terms of the structure? Do you have other proposed changes you'd like to make? Do you support, the creation of a community well-being outcome area and consolidation of infrastructure and transportation and the goals? That's what we'll do tonight. We'll get that feedback from you. We'll bring it back next week to see if you have any other edits and to see if you support moving forward with community engagement. Then we'll do community engagement. Then we'll bring it back to you in January or retreat and ask you to set priorities based on what you think the priorities should be in that engagement. And then after January, we'll spend time with staff and you refining the finer points, so to speak, and then the minutia of the plan, and then bring it back to you in March for final approval and adoption. So some of the questions that we had tonight that we would like to discuss. The first one, as I mentioned, should structural elements of the strategic plan be modified? Meaning, do you support the 6 changes that we're proposing in terms of the 2 related to outcome areas? Do you support, consolidation of projects? Do you support adding metrics, things like that? Should the outcome areas, and some related question, remain as proposed? Do you have other ideas of big buckets of the big outcome areas? And then finally, are there any goals that you see as red flags that need to be modified? And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Dodd. Any questions from council? Mayor Pro Tem.
Can you go back to the slide that shows the metric dashboard? So the thing that caught my eye on this slide is metric number 1, number of new businesses. Every other element on the dashboard seems to be something aside from perhaps the trolley ridership that the city can directly control, like the number of days that a building permit takes to go through. Number of new businesses is not something directly controlled by the city, and percentage change in Inglewood trolley ridership is not something directly controlled by the city, to the extent that we can't force people to ride the trolley or force people to own a new business. So my concern about those two metrics is that they might indicate a lack of health when there are other external forces acting which will change those two metrics other than what the city is actually doing.
Yeah, it's a great point. And so the ultimate kind of goal, I think, of where we want to go in terms of how we use metrics is the 3 levels, right? So the input metrics basically tell us how much we're doing of something, right? So how many programs do we offer at the library, right? And those metrics typically stay internally. Then the level of metrics that we're really trying to add at this point are more the second level, right? The outputs that basically, as I mentioned before, tell us how well we're doing something. So it's not just that we offered programs at the library, but people actually showed up and they completed the programs. But then the highest level, the outcome metrics, many of which right now are ones that do come from the resident satisfaction survey, we kind of, I guess, to use your terminology, which I totally agree with, is basically the further we go up, the less control we have. And so we did think it was important to include some of those metrics because really, we want to show basically the work that we're doing on things that we can control, but also showing that we're really doing those things to kind of aim arrows at achieving these bigger outcomes where we maybe don't have complete control over, but in a sense, they're almost community outcomes, and things that we want to achieve with our partners as well. So I certainly see the point and certainly feel that it might make sense, to really focus at this point more on the ones we can control and then maybe add some of the other ones later, but just an idea.
And if I can add to that, if you did want to change to that, it could be net new businesses or businesses brought in as a result of work. But I think Tim's right. The number of businesses is an important metric, but so is growth of existing businesses. So we could add that one as well. But we're open to your thoughts and feedback on that.
Right. I just think back to the course of my career and sometimes getting the feeling that I'm being graded by my bosses on something that's outside my control. It's very frustrating to me. So I would imagine that the staff who might have their review based on some of these metrics might feel similarly as well. And I do, as someone who's responsible for what happens in the city to a certain extent, feel similarly. If we're failing on something that we can't control, it's worrisome to me.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Noonenkamp.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I know we've had these discussions about how do we more holistically include everything that the city does in the strategic plan, and I appreciate the thoughtful approach to what you've proposed here. I think it's a great path forward, and I'm looking forward to the public engagement piece. And I especially appreciate the inclusion of the KPIs, and I do think that having the dashboard outward facing to the community is really important to not only engage them in the prioritization process, but then also allowing them to see how we're doing and ultimately engaging them further year over year, cycle over cycle. So no steers at this point, but appreciate the thought.
Thank you.
Member Woodward.
Yeah, in addressing some of the things Councilmember Ward had mentioned with regards to metric number 1, number of new businesses, I believe we do have some control over that. That is, what kind of programs are we offering? What kind of outreach do we have? So unless I'm missing something there, I think we do have definitely some ways of measuring that. We don't have a way when there's a year ago when a pandemic starts and blows everything up, but in normal times, what we are doing, what Darren is doing, for example, makes a difference. That's it.
Any other comments from council? Member Anderson?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Assistant Manager Dodd. On the affordability and putting that into the, well, first of all, I really like adding a community well-being outcome area. I think that's a great idea. Putting affordability in there makes sense, but it seems to me that there's also, there's impacts on affordability from a number of other areas in the strategic plan as well. Are we looking at how achieving outcome metrics in one area might impact or even be detrimental to achieving outcomes in another area?
Yeah, thank you, Member Anderson. It's a great question, and would love your feedback on this. So we kind of did that with the sustainability section last year. So we did add a few goal areas, for example, like community resiliency and economic resiliency, to the sustainability section, or even a sustainable infrastructure goal, that really most of the projects came from other sections. And so I think that's one of the tricky things about doing a strategic plan, is that not everything fits really neatly into one area. So we did our best, to fit them into the areas that we thought, maybe 50% plus one of the goal was focused. But if you'd like to see kind of crosstabs or kind of maybe just a graphic way of kind of showing that this also touches these 2 or 3 areas, that's something we totally could do for sure.
Yeah, I would love to see that kind of visualized and see, because I think there are things we could do that would be both, helpful and potentially detrimental to affordability, that might be meeting some goals in other areas of our strategic plan, and just monitoring those things, so at least we know when we're bumping into potential conflicts or resonances. Both are possible there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any other comments from council? I too am in favor of everything that I saw tonight. I do, I'm looking forward to the retreat in late January when we talk about these items. The affordability one is the one that kind of catches my attention, just because of the macroeconomic issues and what are we considering affordability, because everybody has a different definition for what affordability could be to them. So I love to just get into digging deeper into that aspect of the conversations. But other than that, I think everything else is on point. So I don't think I see anything else from members of council. But Assistant City Manager Dodd, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. I think it might be time for a break now, though. For City Council, it's about 7:48 if we want to come back about 8 o'clock. Does that sound right? Let's come back at 8, and then we'll pick up where we left off. Thank you very much. council. We'll get started here in about a minute. Look at that, back at 8 o'clock. All right, council, thanks for taking your seats. Moving on to agenda item 6A, consideration of minutes from the previous session. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting back on November 15th?
I move to approve the meeting, the minutes from November 15th.
I second.
Thank you, Member Nooncamp. Any changes to the minutes? If not, could we please vote?
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Noonenkamp?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Wink?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Sierra?
Aye.
Let the record show 7 ayes.
Perfect. Moving on to agenda item 7, recognition of scheduled public comment. The deadline to sign up to speak for scheduled public comment is Wednesday by 5 p.m. prior to the meeting through the city's clerk's office. This is an opportunity for the public to address city council. There's an expectation that the presentation will be conducted in a respectful manner. Council may ask questions for clarification, but there will not be any dialogue. Please limit your conversation to 5 minutes. Written presentations for the material to council may be submitted to the city clerk. First up tonight is Mr. Ed Kahn, an Englewood resident, will address council regarding easements and code enforcement. And I'm not sure if I see Mr. Kahn here in attendance tonight. Is he online by any chance? No. Nope. Okay. Moving on to the next speaker, Mr. Jesse Vogel will address council regarding the building permit process. Is Mr. Vogel online? Nope. Do we have anybody online by chance?
We do. Our next one,
Okay.
Mrs. McGilly is online and
Well,
ready
there
to
we go. So, okay, next up would be Marsha McGilly will address council regarding the small business economic impact update. Ms. McGilly, good evening.
Thank you, Mayor and council members, for your time this evening. Let me see, can I undo my camera? No, I don't think I can do camera. Well, you can just see my name, I guess, tonight. Thank you so much for your time. It's always great every year when I get to come in and tell you about the connection and the wonderful partnership that we have with the city of Inglewood and that Inglewood has with the Small Business Development Center. We love working with Brad, Darren, and the team. You have a report that I submitted that was quite detailed, and I just want to hit some highlights. During the last 2 years of the pandemic, the Small Business Development Center and our partnership have seen 2 or 3 times the volume in every category of our one-on-one consulting, our workshops, and our impact. And I just want you all to know that volume is huge and staying very high. As far as Inglewood specifically is concerned, this year to date, yesterday, whenever I sent the report in, we held 426 consulting sessions with Inglewood citizens, which are 123 different clients, individual clients. There were 69 webinars that Inglewood citizens attended, and about 800 attended those webinars. And those webinars are ours as well as statewide, the Colorado Network. Jobs created in Inglewood this year, 30, and those retained usually through most of the grants in the pandemic offerings were 261. I want to address business starts. While we're talking about that, in the last 2 years, we've helped 6 businesses start in Inglewood. The people that want to start a business during a downtime increases. Doesn't mean they'll be more successful, but many people, they think it'll be easier to start a business than go back to work somewhere else if they're laid off. And so we have had 400 people attend our startup workshops that you sponsor as a city as one of our sponsors. And we've had 4 English startup business classes, 4 Spanish, and 4 childcare this year. From a leadership perspective, I sit with Darren on the Arapahoe County Recovery Task Force, and I was one of the founders, and Darren is on the Denver South Business Resource Partnership, 2 key leadership organizations where all of the trends of what's happening to businesses, what they need, what we can do to serve them as the Small Business Development Center come from those meetings, and we all share on a county-wide basis, which is wonderful. A couple of other events I'd like to point out to you. The Inglewood Small Business Resource Expo, we did it virtually this year with the city and the Chamber of Commerce, the Inglewood Chamber. That was very successful on September 22nd. We videotaped that, and we did put that up so that it can be viewed over and over again. Let's see, I wanted to say that we directly talk to everyone that applies for your grant programs, the COVID ones, in CARES and now the ARPA ones. We talk with them about their initiation and acceleration grant before they apply, and make sure they're applying the funds to the things that you want them to, and that they'll be successful for the business. And we enjoy talking to all of those great entrepreneurs in Inglewood. Finally, we have a couple things coming up this year. We have a new Colorado Legal Relief Program through the Office of Economic Development and Small Business Development Centers. And so clients can have 1 hour free pro bono legal advice. It can't be anything in litigation. And they can ask questions about contracts, about wanting to incorporate and going from a sole proprietor to a corporation, et cetera. Those kinds of questions. And they get 1 hour free. And then they would be referred to an attorney if they need something further and can't resolve the questions they have in that one session. I think that's all I want to address, because you can read my long report, but I am open to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Executive Director McGilly. Any questions from council? No? Ms. McGilly, Member Anderson is going to be giving a response to public comment tonight, so he may state something at the end of this. But thank you very much for your continued partnership with the City of Inglewood, and look forward to working with you further in 2022.
And thank you all very much.
Perfect, thank you. And then next up is Ms. Patty Meek. I don't see her in attendance either, but she was to address council tonight. And no, I do not see Ms. Patty Meek. So that actually finishes recognition of scheduled public comment. Moving on to unscheduled public comment, I'm getting a head nod no that there are no unscheduled comment or speakers tonight for unscheduled public comment. So this one would be a difficult one for you, Member Anderson, in terms of just responding back to the members of the public. Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to you, Ms. McGilly, for the partnership with the SBDC. I got to get the acronym right. South Metro SBDC. I'm spacing on what the SBDC stands for. I apologize. Small Business, thank you. Small Business Development Center. Thank you very much. Appreciate the work and the partnership with the City of Inglewood on the grant programs and the webinars and everything that's gone into that. Look forward to continue to partner with you in the future, and thank you for the update tonight. And seeing no other commenters tonight, that's all I have.
Thank you, Member Anderson. And moving on to consent agenda items for tonight. I think we're pulling just 9C1 tonight. Is that correct, Member Russell?
Yes, correct.
Anything else for members of council in terms of pulling agenda items? No? Nothing? Okay, can I get a motion to approve consent agenda items 9B1, 9C2 through 5?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Ward and Member Anderson. Can we please vote?
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Newnenkamp?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Wink?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Cyril? Sorry.
Aye.
Let the record show 7 ayes.
All right, perfect. And now moving to agenda item 9C1, the City of Inglewood becoming a B-City USA member. Member Russell, I believe you may have some questions for Park Supervisor Tim Holt. Oh, someone else.
I do. Good evening. So my question is, will there be any unintended consequences to the budget or future requirements on the city as a result of council taking this action?
There will not. There'll be a $300 annual fee every year, and that is it.
Okay, so I mean, I guess one of my concerns was, and I came across this, I was cleaning up my office today, that there had been questions about different pesticides and things like that that we use in the parks. And so I was just wondering if becoming a member of Bee City, I know that we don't use a lot. We use minimally what we need.
Correct.
But there are some things that just cannot be done without some pesticides. So I just wanted to make sure. So actually, I guess I have this question then. If there would be requirements like that, could we terminate our membership?
I believe so. And in the contract that we'll be with them, all they do is they ask us to reduce, and that's it.
Okay. Okay. I believe that is the extent of my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, one other question. Do we renew this every year?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Woodward, do you have a question? Your mic's on.
I'm sorry.
You're throwing me off. You're throwing me off. So since it's on, do you mind actually just making a motion to approve 9C1?
I will make a motion to approve 9C1.
Second.
Thank you, Member Russell. Can we please vote? Oh, wait. Any comments from council? Nope. Seeing none. Can we please vote?
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Neunenkamp? Aye. Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Wink?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Sierra?
Aye.
Let the record show 7 ayes.
Perfect. Thank you. There's no public hearing items for tonight. There's no approval of ordinance on first reading. We are moving now to 11C1. Let me get to that side of the page. It's a motion to approve a contract with American Civil Constructors to provide construction services to finalize park amenity improvements at Jason Park in the amount of $624,756. And we have Manager of Open Space, Dave Lee, and Open Space Activity Supervisor, Lindsay Peterson, to speak on this motion. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us tonight. We recommend that council approve by motion a contract for construction with American Civil Constructors to provide construction services to finalize park amenity improvements at Jason Park.
Perfect. Thank you very much. There's no presentation tonight, right? We've been talking about this item for years now, so very happy that this is now up. Any questions from council tonight for staff? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve?
I move to approve 11C1.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Neunenkamp. Any comments from council? I guess just my only comment is that I'm very happy to see this come forward. It looks like this is the final phase of Jason Park. So I think, actually, just I guess the comment in terms of when this is planned to be completed for the public.
I think this should be completed by early summer. They'll hit the ground running with orders probably in January, depending on supply chain issues. It may take a while for playgrounds and restrooms and things like that. But they should hit the ground running, and it should not take more than 6 months.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Member Woodward, do you have a question?
Yes, just want to verify, the restroom's going back in the same place as the old one is currently?
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
And Member Russell.
Thank you. I have a comment. I greatly appreciate the work that Parks and Rec has done on all of the parks and how we have been able to get a lot done with grant money at And I know that it's very difficult. So I'm excited about this, and I'm also very thankful for Arapahoe County open space monies, because if it wasn't for Arapahoe County, we wouldn't be able to do this. So just want to thank everybody.
Thank you, Member Russell. Without any other comments, can we please vote?
Member Anderson?
Sorry, I believe Member Wink has a comment.
Member Wink.
Thanks. I chose this background so you could see my little hand on the.
Oh, there it is. I see it now. It's on the top left. Thank you, Member Wink.
Sure. I wonder if I can take this opportunity to ask Director Lee about when, it's a little off topic, but when we can expect the new ground cover for Canine Corral. Can we allow that now, Mayor Sierra? Just a quick question, if he knows, or should I wait for that?
Can we wait until, well, actually, just so we won't keep you all night, Member Lee, or Supervisor Lee, can you answer that question?
Yes, that's something that we're working on currently. We've been real busy with the Holiday Express over the last number of weeks, and we've also been down quite a number of park staff from everything from surgeries to COVID. But that's something that now that Holiday Express this is the last weekend for that, we intend to get on that very quickly.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. No other comments? Please vote.
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Newnenkamp?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Wink?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Sierra?
Aye.
Let the record show 7 ayes.
Perfect. And now moving to 11C2, City's contract with MB Transportation expiring December 31st, 2021. Council approval is needed for the 2022 renewal agreement for trolley operations to continue. Here to present is Planning Manager Wade Burkholder, and assisting would be fellow Buff Director of Community Development Brad Power, if needed. Yeah, Mr. Burkholder.
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening.
Members of Council. Staff is recommending that City Council approve the contract with MV Transportation for the continued service of the Englewood Trolley for the 2022 season. And I am here to stand for questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Burkholder. Any questions? Member Newnenkamp.
Thank you. I have just one question, Manager Burkholder. I believe from the information in the packet, this contract has been renewed every year since 2009. Do we have any kind of mechanism where we assess our contracts after a certain point of time and open it back up for an RFP? Or is this something that we've looked at, or is this just something that gets renewed? Can you give me any light on that?
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, we are under a 3-year window for the current RFP. So we generally go out every 2 to 3 years for a new RFP, where we can ask for, additional, for providers to look at additional routes or additional stops that we may want to look at. So we do have a time period where we continually look and assess and go out for new bids for the service.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from council? I do have a question, Ms. Burkholder. I think the numbers are reversed from what we were anticipated at some point earlier this year, where we were expecting to pick up a large majority of the trolley service, but now it's 323,000 by RTD, and we're only picking up a little bit under 100,000. So
this does represent a return to pre-COVID funding from RTD. So yes, you are correct.
So just thank you very much to staff's work in terms of getting the numbers reversed from what we saw earlier this year. Any other comments from members of council? Member Woodward.
Yeah, I just want to comment that I remember when this went into effect originally back in 2004. In fact, council member at the time, Olga Wallison, who was behind it, and I got to ride on one of the first buses, and they all had ART stops, and it was then the ART shuttle. But I think it's really been a successful program that a lot of cities are envious of. And so I'm going to be voting yes on this.
Thank you. We don't have a motion on the table yet, Mr. Member Woodward. Do you want to make a motion to approve?
I would love to. Yes, I would like to make a motion to approve 9C4.
Actually, I think it's 11. Yeah, 11C2. Do you want to approve 11C2?
11C2.
There we go.
Why
Get
is
a
mine
second.
saying 9C4?
I'll second.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any other comments from council?
Mayor, may I
Yes,
make one
please.
comment? To reiterate what you alluded to, staff did a really good job at the direction of some, if not all, of council saying they cut funding or made us pay more last year. So can you please work with RTD? And staff did a great job of preparing talking points for the mayor. The mayor met with RTD, representatives, our elected representative. And so that's why you see the reduction here. And I appreciate staff's good work on that.
And just to clarify, that was the previous mayor, correct? Because it wasn't me. Well, thank you very much. No other comments from council? I don't see any, so can we please vote?
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Noonenkamp?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Wink?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Sierra?
Aye.
Let the record show 7 ayes.
Perfect. Moving on to agenda item 12. Thank you very much, members from Community Development. Thank you. Moving on to Mayor's Choice. Actually, I guess just a couple of items tonight. And I actually am not prepared for this, so can I just pass it to Council Member's Choice? If anybody has anything, come back to me. Member Noonenkamp.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to acknowledge the staff's time and work into the tree lighting this last weekend and the holiday market. It was a wonderful event and a true collaboration between Public Works and Park Recreation and Communications getting the word out. And congratulations to the mayor for doing his first tree lighting. It lit, so that's all we needed to happen. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Member Noonenkamp. Any other comments from members of council? Mayor Pro Tem Ward.
What she said. No, I attended the tree lighting as well with my family. I took my parents and my wife. My parents don't live in Inglewood, but it was a great way to celebrate Inglewood with my folks. It was a delightful night. Couldn't have asked for better weather. And the photo booth in particular, I think, was a lot of fun. My parents actually got photobombed by a small child. I don't have any idea who it is, but I would like to meet this family if if I have the chance, because it's just a delightful picture of my parents that I'll cherish for some time. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Ward. Any other comments from members of council? Nothing from Member Wink. Yeah, I definitely want to thank members of staff for the tree lighting this past Saturday. It was a great event. Thank you very much to Tony Arnaldi, Communications Department, everybody for just getting me up to speed on my part of it. So I wouldn't go off without a hitch. The other item that I did want to mention was this coming Saturday, there's the art studio that's on 600 West Bates, that's right across the street from the Foundry. They're actually going to be having an open house. So the open studio is going to be from, let me just get the times right, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. It's the Dolan, I might be pronouncing the last name wrong, Guyman Studio Open House. So if anybody's aware, if I could get an address here, it is just 600 West Bates. So they're going to be having an open house. They asked members of the city, cultural arts, as well as MOA, anybody to come and stop by and just take a look at that exhibit. And the other aspect that I did want to mention was that this coming Wednesday, the DDA is going to be holding a public hearing on their 2022 budget. So just wanted to make members of council and the members of the public aware of that. I'm trying to think of the location of the DDA. I want to say I may have to get back to everyone on this towards the end, but that's going to be going on at 4:30 this coming Wednesday. And Member Russell, did I skip you? I thought I saw your light on.
You did see my
Go ahead,
light
Member
on.
Russell, yes.
So I just wanted to bring this up. Probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was an attempted carjacking at the Broadway Post Office, and there were some citizens that actually came to the rescue of this woman, and they apprehended the suspect. And so I would just like perhaps for us to some way honor these citizens during the appointments, communications, proclamations, and recognition. So I've already talked to the city manager about that, and so I think it would be good for us to recognize people that reach out to help others in need in the community. So just for your thoughts about that. And I want to thank the people that intervened. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Member Russell, for bringing that to our attention. I definitely would be in favor of bringing that forward as part of a recognition during that part of the agenda at either the next meeting or sometime in January. Member Woodward,
I think I would like to hear from the Chief of Police, or at least talk to him first to make sure there isn't any privacy issues involved with these people being recognized. I mean, retribution to them for something.
We can definitely check on that. I did check with the chief of police today about this, and we're meeting tomorrow to discuss that, but that's a great point. Anything else, Member Russell? Or Mayor Pro Tem Ward, did you want to chime in?
Similar to Member Woodward, I have no problem recognizing that type of heroism as long as the people don't have a problem being recognized. I would be hesitant myself if I was involved in something like that to have my name made public, but not everybody feels the same way, so I'm fine either way.
Perfect. Sounds good. Probably got to look at this. So nothing from Member Wink. No, I don't see a hand. So then moving over to the City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just one quick update, or two actually, but they're both county related. I wanted to let you know that today the City Manager of Sheridan, myself, Tim Dodd, and Sama Fox, the Assistant to the City Manager of Littleton, met with the county commissioners and had a great conversation with them about the county's really kind of the starting point that they're at with homelessness and their efforts to address this using some of their ARPA funds and really setting up a system that hopefully will be ongoing, and how we as a Tri-Cities Homelessness Policy Committee can really plug into their work so that we're aligned from the beginning. I have some experience in other places of where we did not start out aligned with the county, and this is really going the way it needs to go. We are kind of in lockstep with them in how we proceed, and I think that will only benefit the work, because this is a regional approach. Even though we're combined with 3 cities, we really can't work on homelessness in isolation. It needs to be a county-wide, it needs to be a region-wide. And so we are making good steps and progress towards that. We do anticipate an IGA with Arapahoe County on how they will work with us on this. We anticipate, as the action plan that you approved called for, of having a homelessness coordinator. We would like for the county to actually supervise that position, with Tri-Cities having a lot of input into the work plan of how that person will serve the 3 cities that represent Tri-Cities, but that the county will really provide an overarching kind of a parent, if you will, to that work that can be replicated in other sub areas of the county. So we're excited about that. The other one is just to let you know, we're monitoring progress from Arapahoe County in setting up a health department. As you know, Douglas County is already out, but contracting with Tri-County Public Health to provide their health services through the end of 2022. Adams County has also voted to exit Tri-County Public Health Department, and so they too will be served through 2022 by Tri-County Health. So this is going to necessitate Arapahoe County developing its own health district, and so we are monitoring that progress at the county level. The county is anticipating getting a consultant on to really start kind of mapping out what that looks like. But we do have some reports that staff is exiting Tri-County very quickly, but we want to make sure that we are keeping the health services for restaurant inspections, disease prevention control, all of the things that the health department does every day. We'll make sure to work with the county to make sure, and Tri-County to make sure that our businesses are served. So we'll be glad to answer any questions about that. And lastly, on the strategic plan, please take advantage. I've got one-on-ones with a few of you this week. So please, if you've got questions or feedback that you would like to give in the one-on-ones on the strategic plan so that we can be ready for next week, we'll be glad to discuss those with you. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager Lewis. No comments from council. Before we get to the city attorney report, I did want to say that I think the DDA is going to be meeting at Core Consultants on 3473 South Broadway. I'll need to confirm, but it looks to be at Core Consultants this coming Wednesday. And now for the city attorney report.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I wanted to give a short report tonight to let council know that next week we will be presenting on a proposal regarding review of the city charter. Normally, we would do a study session item and have all sorts of discussion and lay the groundwork and then bring forward an item for potential action at a council meeting. However, in order to align this process with the city's current process of board appointment and interviews, we are expediting the proposed procedure. So because there's not going to be a study session and I'm combining a presentation, study session / resolution, I wanted to give you a heads up that this is coming. So next week you can expect a PowerPoint on a proposed charter review committee to be appointed by council to work with a consultant to review every section of our city charter and to make recommendations to city council as to whether or not some of the provisions of charter should be revised. So just wanted to give you a heads up that that's coming, and I would welcome any questions before that formal presentation.
Member Anderson.
Thank you, City Attorney Niles. If we're trying to align this with our board and commission appointments upcoming in January, have we made this available for people to apply specifically to this board, or are we going to be able to do that in sufficient time, or are we going to kind of just choose from the pool that applies if there are extra people?
No, we haven't advertised yet because City Council hasn't created it yet. But I've already worked with communications to make sure we have a plan to be able to target potential applicants, because I do anticipate we would solicit people to specifically apply for this because it's such an important job to advise City Council. So communications is prepared as soon as if council chooses to create it, to advertise, solicit candidates. I've worked with the city clerk's office to create a specific application for it. And then we would propose the application process be the same as the other city boards. Deadline of January 4th, interviews by city council, and then appointment by city council.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other comments from council? Over here. Member Woodward.
Do you foresee how many meetings this is going to take up, and any idea on timing?
So I actually spoke with a consultant that has done projects like this for other cities. They propose 2 meetings a week until the end of June. Because if City Council wants to put any charter amendments on the ballot, we need to do so with first reading on July 5th. So it would be a 6-month commitment, twice a week.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? Thank you very much. Anything else, City Attorney?
No, I don't have anything else.
Perfect. We're on to the last item of the agenda, which is adjournment. So if there's nothing else, no, I'm not using the gavel, but everyone, it's about 8:30. Have a great evening. See you all next week. Thank you.